You guys hear okay in the room, in the back? You hear okay? If I talk like this, okay? Online, yeah, okay. Slick. It's like bad enough having to wear all these different layers of clothing, then there's like wires and things dangling off of you. Well, it's really nice to be here with you. I've been away a minute. I take a sabbatical during the summers, which is a custom that I started, I don't know, 15, 20 years ago, back when I was like really, really, really overworking all the time. And it took me quite a while to give myself permission to even ask for that. And then even after I finally asked for that, and of course everyone in both organizations I was working for said, "Oh, of course, yeah, yeah, yeah. We don't know how you do it. Take a break, take a break." And then I had a lot of trouble for a few years, like still like giving my permission to actually go. Like I'll just go to one meeting. I'll just answer a few emails. I'll just. So, do you have this problem? Yeah. So now I'm not working quite as hard, and so I did a few times. This time, notice that old voice, like a new version of that old voice. That voice is just waiting, saying, "Yeah, you're not working that hard anymore. Do you really need this still?" Yes. So, and I hope we all can have lives where we can take breaks regularly. We need that. We need that. The other thing I think that's a part of that is we tend to think that we're pretty essential. Do you know what I mean? It's an ego thing. We're not wrong. Like if what you do matters, you do matter, right? You matter. But we're never really essential. And you see people get stuck in all kinds of situations and relationships and jobs and stuff that's not really right for them anymore, right? Because they think they're essential. Sometimes it turns out you can be more helpful by getting out of the way for a while. So kudos and thank you to everybody who are doing new things around here. Many of the different practices we do put you a little bit out there, a little bit vulnerable. You're whacking things or saying things or being up in front or something like this, saying a lot of things. And it's good. It's challenging and it's good. And it happens more if the usual people who always are doing all that, like get out of the way so you can help people. You can be more essential by getting out of the way sometimes too. At least that's what it seems like I've learned. And regularly forget and then learn again. So thank you to everybody who did things, from giving Dharma talks, thank you, to ringing bells, to sitting on the little cushions, sitting still for 40 minutes. Did you really do that? It's a long time. That's pretty vulnerable right there. So what I've been enjoying doing in the talks for a good part of the year is we throw this little book at you and we have you chant things that you've never heard of before. Or maybe you are around for a long time and you've got it memorized, but rarely do we really take the time to explore it carefully and really see what's this stuff say, where did it come from, how might it be useful to us, how did it get in here. I mean, somehow certain things got in here and other things didn't get in here. So I've been working my way through the chant book. And in early June, so it's been a minute, but in early June, we went through a Zen poem called The Merging of Difference and Unity, which is on page 11 and 12. And so in order to find out my assignment, I just looked and to see what the next page was. And the next page is a text called the Metta Sutta. That's on 13 and 14. So be mindful of multitasking, but we'll go through it together and you have it here. So our attention will kind of go back and forth between what we're saying together and reading the book a little bit. So this is a very early text, the Metta Sutta. It's labeled here. And then interestingly, if you turn one more page, you'll see another version of the same exact thing. It looks different on the page, but it's the same text. And here we have the title in English, Sutra on Loving Kindness, is what Metta Sutta means. Sutra on Loving Kindness. And sutra, technically in Buddhism, are words that the Buddha actually said. And a lot of them, it's explicit and clear that the Buddha said it, because at the beginning of the sutra, then there's a narrator saying, the Buddha came and we all sat down and gave a talk, and this was where we were, and this was who was there. There's often a little introduction. And this one is from a book of the early teachings that are more like verses, and probably verses that the monks and nuns all memorized, where they leave out that part. But it's in the background, and we'll get to that too. This one was recorded and preserved in the Pali language of South India, which isn't a living language that people speak so much anymore. It just ended up being the language that everything was written down in, so it became a pretty precise language for Buddhism, for the earliest teachings. And then a little bit later, Sanskrit replaced it. The later Buddhisms of India were recorded in Sanskrit. And then it all got translated into all the different cultures it went. Chinese, Tibetan, all kinds of other languages. But the funny thing about Chinese is that the Chinese invented this incredible system of writing, as you probably know. It's the oldest system of writing still in use. And so a lot of other cultures around it said, boy, they've already got this figured out. We don't need to reinvent that. And so cultures in Korea, Japan, Vietnam, a few other places too, Mongolia, use the same Chinese characters, although they may pronounce them differently. They may also have a phonetic alphabet. Languages are very layered in Asia. And so when this stuff got translated into Chinese, then it could kind of move all over the place. So the funny thing about this text, though, is it's from this early Buddhist tradition, and it's kind of weird that we would be chanting it here, because we're from a whole other branch of Buddhism. We're from this later branch that was recorded in Sanskrit and then translated into Chinese, and then it made it to Japan. And the Japanese, as I say, have a little different way of pronouncing that Chinese, but they're sourcing from the same texts. And so it was only recently that any Japanese people, ever saw anything from the early Buddhism, These probably were translated into Chinese, but they just weren't really a part of the deal. They weren't part of the Zen deal. And I actually have, up to this day, I have from the Sotoshu, the Japanese Zen church, the official chant book, and it doesn't have it in it. It doesn't have this in there. So this is an edition done in the West, done in Western Buddhism. Because Zen is super good and super explicit and super clear about one aspect of all this. Wisdom. Clarity, just this, a certain kind of precision. And the warmth and the compassion and the love that's also in there is more like implied, and embodied. But it's not really written down in the Zen texts. There's vast, long sutras that describe all kinds of far-out stuff, but, it's not a whole lot of discussion of compassion. And especially Zen's sort of like condensed version, its most important literature, is like super pithy and smushed down and encompassed in little stories. These are the famous koans of Zen. And there are hundreds and hundreds of these stories, and every one of them has this sort of incisive, decisive, sometimes a little hard to understand, but like something happened here. Something happened where somebody realized something, somebody understood something, somebody shifted in some deep way and saw something more clearly. But only like a handful of those ever mention compassion, kindness, love, loving kindness. So our teachers in the West felt like, we might misunderstand all this, And it may be in some places in the 60s and the 70s, Western Zen students did in fact misunderstand it. And were kind of jerks. And sometimes in the Zen centers, because it was only this. and never this, you know. There wasn't a lot of hugging going on. We have a lot of hugging now. If you're not a hugger, please say so. It's okay. You don't have to hug, but we can all bow. So we added texts like this Metta Sutta. Although this translation that we're going to start looking at tonight on pages 13 and 14 was kind of done a little Zenish too, which we'll get to. We didn't kind of take the straight early text. We kind of Zenified it a little bit, you know, because we couldn't fully, you know, we could only mostly we could let this in, you know. So let's jump in. Let's jump into this beautiful text. It's so encouraging, you know. And in many ways it's surprisingly contemporary, you know, when you read it slowly enough to really take it in. And maybe you haven't chanted this because mostly we chant this at the retreats, at lunchtime, in the noon service. So I hope you'll come to some of the upcoming retreats. We have 3 of them coming up this fall, and then we'll chant that in the middle of the day. So the very first line is a sort of important introduction to what this is going to be about. This version says, "This is what should be accomplished by the one who is wise, who seeks the good and has obtained peace." This is what should be accomplished. So the rest of the text is going to describe what the life of someone who is wise, who seeks the good, and has obtained peace looks like. So in a way it's a teaching like here's how to do something, but in a way it's actually just a description. Like this is what your life would look like if you really were this way. And that's fine, you know, and that does seem to be pretty close to the Pali that's behind this English. But I also found a couple other translations that seem to me more helpful to how I think about myself anyway. One of them by an American monk who's very trustworthy actually, but he has his own kind of spin sometimes, named Tanasaru Bhikkhu. A couple of us have met Tanasaru Bhikkhu in the past. He translates this first line a little differently. He says, "This is to be done by one skilled in aims who wants to break through to the state of peace." This is what should be done by one skilled in aims who wants to break through to the state of peace. So there's a little more sense of like you've got something already, right? You're skilled in some way. You're understanding your life more clearly. You're trying to be a good person and all this, studying the teachings, doing the practice, developing yourself. But something's missing, right? Something doesn't feel quite right. And I think that's accurate, right? You know, don't you think? Like, yeah, you know, I'm doing pretty good. We're all doing pretty good, but you know, right? Something needs a little more something, right? Don't you think? So that just kind of describes this a little more as a vehicle, like a vehicle to get to this state of peace. So I don't know, it's a small difference maybe, but I thought that was interesting that they were translated in a couple different ways. So after this introduction, we first have some sort of summary lines, sort of big picture stuff, and then we'll get into the details a little bit after that. So the first line is, "Let one be strenuous, upright, and sincere, without pride, easily contented, and joyous." So there's a whole lot of words packed in there. Interesting, what they led with is strenuous. Let one be strenuous. So it appears we've got to be willing to do the work, you know. And for some reason, I sometimes feel like I should apologize for my mind, but I just, you know, I say what I thought of, you know, usually. For some reason the strenuous thing made me think, well, as opposed to what, you know? As opposed to just relaxing and being happy. And then I remembered a hit song from 1988. So I'm dating myself. I think we have some teachers here in the generation that's going to be increasing like what to most of the people, but in 1988 there's a singer named Bobby McFerrin who was actually an a cappella singer, and he had the first a cappella hit, you know, so a cappella meaning without instrumentation. Here's my attempt at the first verse. So it's not saying this, but maybe it should. Maybe we'll also say this. Here's a little song I wrote. You might want to sing it note for note. Don't worry, be happy. In every life we have some trouble. When you worry, you make it double. Don't worry, be happy. And then I'm going to bungle this part. Then he has a great little solo. Woo, 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 woo. Don't worry, be happy. That wasn't too bad. You forgot to record, right? Ah, dang. That's immortalized. May I'll finally go viral. I've been waiting. So it doesn't start with that, right? It starts with strenuous. Strenuous, upright, and sincere. So this does seem like kind of the Zen gig. Like, you know, we're going to do the work. We're going to show up for this. We're showing up for ourselves here. You know, it's not always so easy to drag yourself out the door, right? On a Wednesday night, or get yourself to sit down at home, or read a Dharma book when you could watch Netflix or whatever, you know? So there's some strenuousness to all this. But then it's got a nice little counterbalance, and maybe we can bring Bobby McFerrin back for the rest of the song, but then it says, without pride, that's a sort of pivot, an important pivot, right? So that's what I kind of saying about maybe some of the early Western Zen students were pretty good at strenuous, upright, and sincere, and a little proud, you know, a little intense, a little proud. So we got to be humble about this, you know. Sometimes I think instead of being like the least bit proud, if we're like, you know, so-called good Zen student, we should be a little bit embarrassed, you know, like I messed up enough that I need serious help, you know, you know. I need like a 2,500,000-year-old tradition to like straighten me out, you know, and I got to commit to it completely, and I can't goof off, you know. So why would you be proud of that, you know? Other people apparently just can relax, you know, and have a good life. So, but then we do get back to happiness. But it's interesting; it comes at the end of this line: easily contented and joyous. Easily contented and joyous. So there's joy here as well. And I think maybe it's a limit of our understanding. It kind of maybe it's a Western cultural thing. I don't know, that we have this kind of monotone kind of attitude, right? Either you're serious or you're happy, right? You know. So this is both. Seriously happy, you know. Happily serious about your life. And whenever I think about these ways that what might seem to us like opposites could coexist, I always, for some reason, think about His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Have you seen any film or heard audio or anything of him? You should if you haven't yet. He laughs a lot, you know. And he's the leader of a country that's being destroyed, you know, and overrun and has been invaded. And he meets people who suffer from all this very seriously every day, and he knows how to have a chuckle too, you know, serious and happy. And then we get a little bit, sort of increasingly get into the details of how we might practice all this. So then it says, let one not be submerged by the things of the world. Let one not take upon oneself the burden of riches. Let one's senses be controlled. We'll pause there. So not submerged by the things of the world, not taking upon ourselves the burden of riches, letting our senses be controlled. So this is interesting because this sounds like the Buddha's talking to us, right? Because we get submerged by the things of the world. We get worried about our financial health, you know. And we'll come to the senses in a minute. So this surprises me because the story about this text is the Buddha gave it to monastics, you know, who had already gone through this process where they stepped out of the things of the world. In that monastic system, and there are people who still live this way today. Actually, one of them's going to come visit the temple and meet with me next week, actually, a monastic person. Where the whole idea is you don't own much of anything. A couple of robes and a bowl. You're allowed to have some medicine and a toothbrush. The bowl's pretty big, but just one bowl. And not only do you not have a burden of riches, you don't have any money. The full monastics in Buddhism aren't allowed to touch money, you know. And the story about the creation of this little text is this, and this came a little bit later than the original strata of writing. And even that original writing was hundreds of years after the life of the Buddha. These stories were repeated orally for a long time. We can barely remember, you know, what we saw on one screen in the time it takes to get to the other screen, but somehow these guys kept these texts alive for hundreds of years by reciting them, you know. And the story is that a group of monastics they would sort of spread out and find places to practice. So this one group of monastics went out to a forest where they'd never practiced before. And it just felt creepy to them. They couldn't settle. They had weird dreams and visions. One version describes they kept seeing sort of ghostly corpses all over the place, and it freaked them out, you know. They couldn't practice there. So they left and went back to the Buddha and said, you know, that forest is like haunted and creepy and we can't practice there. Terrible bad dreams, you know. And the Buddha said, oh, well, there's some unsettled spirits there and they need teachings. They need medicine. So listen carefully. I'm going to give you a teaching that you can give to the spirits of that place. And so he recited this. He recited the Metta Sutta. And as the monks and nuns walked back into the forest, they were saying it out loud as they walked along, and I think they said it as they were sitting and setting up their little camp and stuff. And it worked. And the spirits of the forest were at ease and happy, and they could have good practice there. And a little sidebar for us, if you have been to our summer week-long practice where we rent a camp on Samish Island, a church camp, we discovered that there were unhappy spirits there, and so we do the same thing now. We offer them this Metta Sutta. We do a special ceremony outside and offer them this chant, and I hope it helps them. I hope so. We also apologize for the harms that our cultural ancestors have done in these lands, which are so deep. So anyway, it's a little puzzling to me, and maybe one day I'll find some scholarly article about this. I do like to geek out and have a whole nother talk again. But why does it say about submerged by the things of the world and riches? But good thing it does, because we need this. The last line of those three, let one's senses be controlled, though, is very monastic. Very monastic. This is a huge theme in early Buddhism. Don't get distracted, basically. Don't get so excited about sensual things. You know, for one thing, they did practice celibacy, so that's a pretty sensual thing that comes in through the senses, the experience of sexuality. You know, of course, there's a lot one could say about that way of practicing. But it's interesting, sometimes in the early teachings they're a little bit hard to take, actually, because sometimes the senses are presented as dangers. These portals through which dangerous things might enter your mind. And I feel good about it overall, though. The intention is quiet down, you know. Quiet your life down. Don't be running around so much, you know, consuming and absorbing and grabbing onto exciting new things to see and hear and listen to. And yeah, we do some of that, huh? The whole media industry would be in trouble if we really practiced like monastics, you know. There would be no hits and no followers anywhere. And what I hear in that, which isn't always expressed explicitly, is let your enjoyment be quiet, you know. Enjoy a flower, your breath, good company, quiet company. And that's one of the things I love also about our retreats, if you want to come try one, is we practice being quiet together, literally. We practice silence, but we're together, you know. We do that this evening too. So let your senses be controlled means, yeah, don't be wild, you know. Quiet down. Make more space to reflect, more space for practice, more space to just be. And sometimes you read that stuff and it does sound a little dire, like, yeah, don't enjoy anything, you know. Some of the later Buddhisms actually turned that around and said, well, actually, you can transform yourself if you just understand the senses in a different way, you know. But that's a whole other topic. So then it says, let one be wise, but not puffed up, and let one not desire great possessions for one's family. Let one do nothing that is mean, or that the wise would reprove. So wise and not puffed up is humility again, right? Is not being proud. So the other thing about traditional texts is if they really want to make a point, they repeat it. And as moderns, we're kind of like, yeah, you already said that. So I think we have to be really take in repetition in a more receptive way to appreciate these texts and say, okay, yeah, not prideful, humble, not puffed up. Okay, okay. And the Buddha wouldn't have said this over and over again if he didn't think we need to hear it. I think we probably do, right? Then again, we have one that seems like it's oriented towards people living in the world like us, householders, they sometimes say, about possessions. For some reason in our English translation it's in the same sentence. I don't know why that's one sentence, but not puffed up and seems like a different topic, but anyway. And let one not desire great possessions even for one's family. So thinking about 1988, I was thinking, yeah, back then you had to go to a store to buy a possession, or you would do mail order, which could actually be filling out a little form and mailing it to the company. And then sometime, like weeks later, a package would show up, you know. And then later you could call them and order it, you know, because there was no internet. So at least we had that slowing us down a little bit, but now it's like, oh, it's already on my porch. How'd that happen? Sometimes Amazon puts it on the porch before you order it somehow, you know. They're working on time control. But not for you or for your family. That's really helpful because, and these next two lines have this same balance. There's you, and then there's also considering others, and how others reflect back on you gives you a lot of support, right? So yeah, you could sort of, impatiently fall for a desire for this, that, or the other and buy it, but if you're wise, you check with your family too, right? Sometimes this leads to a little bit of stress in relationships. Is it okay if I buy this? Not really. We don't need that. So it's helpful to have wise others to listen to, whether they're formally your family or not. I'm a big fan of chosen family. Probably that'd be even better if we all had chosen family. Maybe that's what Sangha is. And the same thing with this last line of this sort of clump here, which is shown as a paragraph. Let one do nothing that is mean, or that the wise would reprove. So what's mean and not is pretty subjective, right? Like it may seem a little mean, but actually it's tough love, right? Or actually it's helpful, or actually it's just what I think you need to hear. And this is our practice of precepts, right, and ethics. To not be mean. But then you check yourself out in this by wondering, well, if I told a wise person about this, would they agree with me? And even more clear is if you think about the idea of telling a wise person, you say, nah, I don't want to tell that person that I did this. Then you know, right? That's no question if you don't want to tell somebody. A little privacy is okay, but secrecy is always probably unhealthy, you know. So this is a description of a way of living, and then this next part is how you practice as that person, how you bring this back out into the world. And this is where it's an expression of this idea of loving kindness, of metta in Pali. May all beings be happy. May they be joyous and live in safety, all living beings, whether weak or strong, in high or middle or low realms of existence, small or great, visible or invisible, near or far, born or to be born, may all beings be happy. And so the idea is this is the thought that naturally arises in you when you're living in this way that it's describing. You could never look at somebody and say, yeah, deal with it. No, you would just feel nothing but love and support for everybody. So happy, though, may be a little problematic for some of us, because happy sounds a little flip, So, words have power, and these are all words that are translated from another language. The actual line in Pali sounds something like this: Sabbe satta bhavantu sukhitata. Sukhitata. So sabbe means all. The first word there means all. And the second word, satta, like sattva, means being. So all beings, that's really literal. The third word I said, bhavantu, means may they be. So that's all good. All beings, may they be. And the last word is a version of the word sukha, which if you're a Buddhist geek, you may have heard of dukkha. So this is the opposite of dukkha, sukha, happiness. Dukkha is suffering. So may all beings be happy. That seems like it is what it says. But, what kind of happiness are we talking about? There's another word in Pali, piti, P-I-T-I, that means like joy and delight. So piti is kind of the bubbly, yippee, those exciting moments, Your team wins the game, you get the letter of acceptance, those kind of moments. He or she or they say yes to whatever you want to, do. And sukha actually is a more grounded kind of joy. So that's what we mean here. So it's always translated as happy in English, but maybe it should be grounded joy. I read one of the early Indian commentators said that piti, the other word, is the delight of getting something desirable, while sukha, the word here, sukha, is the savoring of it once you have it, the savoring of it. So it's a savoring of joy. That sounds about right, huh? So may all beings savor joy. And the real core idea in all of this, all of these teachings, and all of Buddhism really, is to notice how messed up we are by what you might call conditionality, if this, then that. If you're nice to me, I'll be nice to you, right? If I get what I want, then, If only I had, then I could get, right? It's all this conditional stuff, And here, our intention is to release from that. Sometimes as we talk about this even in our very language, the idea that we have opposite words like big and small, high and low, me and you, it separates us, right? We get separated, and everything becomes conditional because we're separated. And when we come together fully, then it's unconditional. And this, of course, is what's so great about, wonderful moments of aesthetic art, wonderful moments of real love, is those moments are unconditional, right? You're just there. You're just there. So So the idea of loving kindness is that it's unconditional, and that whole expression said that. Wish all beings are happy, everyone, big ones, little ones, visible ones, invisible ones. And you notice it does not say, may all beings who deserve it be happy. Deserving and not deserving is just an idea in our minds, a conditional idea. So the healing of this is letting go of such ideas to where not just like, okay, I'm not going to think that way, but like where it doesn't make sense anymore. Why would I think that way, We are all beings who want to be happy and free from suffering. So naturally we love each other. We want to help each other out. And if you rub me the wrong way, that's some conditioning for me to look at, It's not your problem. Even though I might think it is, if I'm separate. So this is about the practice of unconditional love, actually. So this is like pretty far out, And we can just go chant this, The other place we've used this text is for a while, and I'm sure we'll bring these back because it seems like war hasn't stopped in the world yet. At our peace walks, we've been gathering together with people in lots of different communities and walking silently for peace. And we stop somewhere and we chant this. And people seem to really relate to it, even though they don't never kind of done Buddhist stuff. They seem to appreciate it. So let's explore this idea of unconditional love. We have an exploration kind of system, which I'm sure most of you have done, but I'll explain it. And I hope everyone feels fully invited to just be yourself in all this. Is we gather together for these last few minutes of the hour, sitting in a little group of 3. And online we can do a breakout room group. We'll figure it out. And we take turns speaking. One person speaking, the other 2 might be other 1 or other 3, but the other ones just deeply listening. And that's a kind of unconditional practice too. No matter what you say or don't say, I'm going to listen completely and with joy, Whether I have a question, whether I like what you're saying, whether I don't like what you're saying, whether I don't understand what you're saying, I'm just happy that you're saying something. And I'm going to practice deep listening. And we'll do each person will have like a 4-minute turn to speak, and I'll ring bells and stuff, and people in breakout rooms might have to time yourselves. And I thought the topic could be something like, what supports me in offering love unconditionally, and what gets in the way? And the intention here is not that you're going to reveal what a terrible person you are, or show off about what an incredibly enlightened person you are, but just explore out loud, And when this works well, you may be surprised by some of the things that pop out of your mouth, like, oh yeah, that's true, yeah. This helps me be more loving and open. Oh, this gets in the way, look at that. And now the others will just witness this. Okay, let's try that. So, what supports you in offering love unconditionally, and what gets in your way?